Our agenda for this morning is just to start with a little bit of background on the development and the need for the bill, discussions of the specific provisions of HB 1745, especially highlighting some of the recent amendments that have been in the bill since the last time we had a webinar on this, and as it's been progressing through the legislature. Giving an update on the current status of the bill in the legislature, and then next steps and opportunities for advocacy for everyone on the call today and your networks and colleagues as well. So I will start it off with Debra.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are delighted to speak to you about a piece of legislation in Pennsylvania that actually has a very good chance of passing this session, which is something that is the exception rather than the rule in Pennsylvania. Briefly, House Bill 1745, or the Fostering Independence Through Education Act, was introduced in this session on August 17th, 2017, but it had been introduced in different forms twice prior and never made it out of committee, in the House Education Committee. In general, the House Bill 1745 is designed to provide waivers of tuition and fees at state-related colleges and universities for Pennsylvania foster youth. My colleague Jenny Pokempner will go into more details in a few minutes about the specific provisions of the legislation, but that's the overarching purpose, with a number of other components to really support the legislation's effectiveness. So the prime sponsor of the bill is Representative Dave Hinkernell, who represents Dauphin and Lancaster counties. He's been a member of the House Education Committee in this current session, became chair of that committee, and really took this on as his piece of legislation that he felt strongly that he wanted to pass. They held an information hearing within the committee that was very well attended. Wonderful panelists ranging from specific schools that would be impacted to different experts to constituents, former foster youth, foster parents. So it was a wonderful session. It was a standing room only session. The bill was moved forward for a vote in the House Education Committee, passed, and the end of June was passed through the full House of Representatives unanimously with a vote of 194-0, and then moved on to the Senate when the Senate reconvened this fall. The bill currently sits in the House, the Senate Education Committee. So the next steps in the process will we are hopeful that the chair of the committee will bring this up for a vote in the committee and then move on to vote through the Senate and signature with the governor by the time the legislature, this session is over in November, early November. There's a link where you can find the bill on the slide. As you can see, the bill had extensive co-sponsors. So there was, and these are all House representatives representing a really statewide picture of support. And so we're grateful to have such strong co-sponsorship in the House for the bill. Okay, so why is this legislation actually needed? What is this about? Well, we don't believe that everyone should go to college, nor should every foster youth go to college. But every foster youth who wants to attend college really should have the same opportunities as other youth. And we as a society are really responsible for their future. Research tells us that 70% of youth in foster care want to attend college, which is really a stunning figure. But sadly, they attend at less than half the rate of their peers. Those who do graduate, it typically takes them 6 or more years to graduate, but most don't make it beyond their first year. Research also tells us that financial barriers are the prime reason that youth don't make it, that they don't return after their first year. But other things also impact that, including the lack of support to both navigate the challenges of college and the lack of family support to help sustain their efforts on a social and emotional level. So although we do need we do need to support not only access to college, helping youth be able to attend and enroll, but also their success once they get there. And there are components of this legislation that address not just access to, but also retention. For those, so what we want to do is it's important to support both enrollment, persistence, and graduation from college, and that is what the intention is to do. And we find, in particular, that lack of retention is a significant issue for youth in foster care. So, why education? Why do we look at education? Well, the education has been shown to correlate with more positive outcomes for youth who age out of the foster care system. It shows that it reduces the likelihood of poor outcomes such as involvement in the criminal justice system, involvement with substance abuse, early pregnancies. On a financial level, it provides higher lifetime wages and more opportunities for employment. So there is a very strong self-sufficiency component to this. Foster youth tell us that they've been part of the system as foster youth. They don't want to be dependent on the public systems for their future and their care, and they want to be able to be independent. And college will help them do that and contribute to that. So, college provides more than, provides very positive outcomes and really hope for the future for young people. Next slide. Okay. But foster youth face a number of specific barriers that others of us who attend college typically don't face. What they find often is that in order to maintain their financial aid status of being full-time, they have to work full-time while they're attending school full-time, and do that all without the support of family. So that can be overwhelming. That's one of the reasons why many of them don't continue and drop out. It's just too much to handle. Prior to going to college, they really are not prepared for college. Most foster youth are not on a college track in high school. They often move frequently, and when they move, they lose academic progress with every subsequent move. Every time they move, they go backwards in terms of their academic progress. So they really are not well academically prepared. People don't necessarily see foster youth as college, quote, material, so they don't encourage them to enroll in college preparatory courses, so they don't have a good, strong academic foundation for that. What they also do is that when they get to campus, that they are alone. They don't have family supports. They don't have a safety net when they face academic, financial, health, or social challenges, which we know most kids in college do. So all of those factors really contribute to and present barriers to them to being successful. So now I'm going to introduce my colleague, Jenny Pokempner, who will tell you how this legislation can actually make a difference.
Great, thanks, Debbie, and thanks everyone for joining. We do want to remind you there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but please feel free to chat in any questions in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them as we go through the presentation. But we're going to move to talking about the provisions of the bill, and Debbie talked about all the issues we want to address, and the bill really does attempt to take on each of those issues and have a response. We don't by any means think that House Bill 1745 is going to answer all these issues that we're addressing in terms of supporting higher education access and success, but we think this would lay a really great foundation, make a huge difference, but lay a foundation for a lot of really great work in the Commonwealth and a lot of work probably that you all on the call are doing. So we'll go through just quickly the sections of the bill, and as Nadia and Debbie mentioned, there has been, through the process of going through the House, there's been a couple of amendments that are pretty positive, so that the bill that we have now in the Senate is slightly different than what we had when it entered the House. Next slide. So as Debbie mentioned, the institutions that are covered are listed on this slide. So this is a tuition and fee waiver for universities and institutions in Pennsylvania. And again, this list is the the schools that are covered. So all community colleges, Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology, schools that are designated as state-related, Penn State, University of Pittsburgh, Temple, and Lincoln, and then schools within the state system of higher education, so the PASHE schools. So here on this slide, you'll see these are the PASHE schools. And again, we know a lot of young people in foster care are attending these schools, are really interested in attending. So the statute really does provide giving young people an array of options to use the tuition and fee waiver if it is passed. And as Debbie mentioned, young people in foster care have the same kind of diversity and variety that youth outside of foster care have in terms of if they do decide they want to go to higher education, a lot of different options, 2-year schools, 4-year schools, and again, within those two categories, a lot of variety as well. And this at least would give a lot of choices and options for young people across the state. Next slide. And in terms of who's eligible to take advantage of the tuition and fee waiver, what I think we think is a very good amendment to the bill is that now it is extended so that young people could use the tuition and fee waiver up until age 26. And that does make this bill consistent with recent changes in the Chafee Act, the Education and Training Vouchers, which also extended the ability of young people to be eligible to use them until 26. So we think this is a good thing because the research also does tell us that young people, not just in foster care, are taking longer to complete higher education. They're starting a little later. And so this would really provide more support for successful completion. And in terms of other eligibility criteria, these have also been changed slightly, so we do want to highlight them for you. That an eligible young person has been substitute care for no less than 6 months, and then they must be any of these criteria below. So in substitute care as a dependent child at 14 or older, placed in substitute care with shared case management. So we have in Pennsylvania Shared Case Management Bulletin, which kind of describes the array of relationships and ways of case management that would involve a young person who is dependent but may have some shared case management or dual adjudication in the juvenile justice system. It also includes young people adopted out of the child welfare system at age 14 or older or entering permanent legal custodianship arrangements. So these last two bullets, as we've mentioned in previous webinars, are really supposed to ensure that we do support young people and families in the achievement of permanency, so that we definitely want to support young people who do age out of the foster care system, but we also want to make sure that families that are going to help achieve permanency for a young person, that they also have the benefit of these provisions so that they can provide the best type of care and support for young people. And then the last three bullets have to do with just requirements around attendance at schools and also accessing other resources. So the young person does have to have graduated or received a state diploma or GED or equivalent, accepted for admission, or youth who are attending the eligible schools could be eligible for the waiver as well. And then the last bullet is important because to use the tuition and fee waiver, young people have to have first applied for the all available federal and state grants. And the intention there is really to make sure we're utilizing all the resources that are available to young people in terms of aid and grants before we go to the tuition and fee waiver. And so we are hopeful that this provision will allow us, again, to maximize everything that's available for young people to help ease the financial barriers to higher education. Next slide. The bill also contains some outreach requirements. As many of you on the call probably know, you guys actually on the call are ones who know about probably everything that's available to young people in foster care related to higher education. But you probably also know that you've run into colleagues or young people who don't, and maybe they've already taken out a loan or they have made a decision to not go to school because they weren't aware of Chafee or they weren't aware of other grants and assistance. So the bill does create an outreach requirement that has to be carried out by the Department of Education so that the school system is touched and is providing outreach to students and also to the institutions that are covered. So we are really hopeful that these provisions will really make sure that all young people who are eligible are aware and that they are provided assistance in terms of actually completing applications and getting the assistance they need. And the outreach requirements also, if you could go back a second, thanks, have some requirements around tracking so that we can, and we'll talk a little bit more about data and reports in a second, but the outreach requirements also include some of these requirements about tracking so that we are, as this law is implemented, if it passes, that we're really keeping track of how the program is working so that we're constantly trying to figure out ways to improve it and serve students better. Next slide. Thanks. And then another really crucial portion of the bill is this requirement for points of contact. And there's been a couple of amendments to the bill, but the basic goal of this provision is to make sure that young people who have experience in foster care do have someone that they can turn to and get assistance from at these institutions. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that point of contact has to know everything about accessing services and help, but it does mean that they have to be able to provide that assistance to young people or connect young people with the supports and individuals who can help them and make those types of referrals. And we do think this is such an important provision. A lot of the work that the Field Center is doing that Debbie mentioned is really about creating campus supports for students. And so we really think these points of contact are a way to, again, build this in, at least a foundation for broader support for youth in foster care in these institutions. Again, a foundation to start, but something that we think is really crucial. And so we really think this is a great provision and think it will help not only with helping students access aid and assistance, but also helping with ongoing kind of retention and support. Next slide. And then there's a provision in the bill on reporting and tracking, and again, this complements what is in the section on outreach. But again, it's really making sure that as soon as this bill is implemented, we start with the approach of making sure we are collecting data and information so we can improve the program. As I said a couple of times, this is the beginning, creating kind of a foundation within our post-secondary institutions in Pennsylvania. And the data requirements and reports, I think, will help us figure out what is the best way to support students. And some of the data hopefully will tell us that that there are a lot of resources that we have available and help us figure out how to use them more efficiently. But I think it will also tell us information about how to reach more students and any barriers and help us come together and really brainstorm to address those barriers. But this is an important provision, and so it's definitely a positive, I think, for all of us to have this, and will help with advocacy and serving students. Next slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. So for the remainder of the webinar today, we would like to go over the legislative steps to the passage of HB 1745 and then really encourage everyone on the call in your networks to help us with this advocacy to ensure that the bill gets passed. So as was mentioned earlier, currently the bill is in the Senate Education Committee and it must be scheduled for a vote by the chair, Senator John Eichelberger. And once it is scheduled for a vote, then the entire Education Committee has the opportunity to vote on it. And if it's voted in support, then it goes to the full Senate. And if the majority of the full Senate approves it, then it's sent to the governor for signature. So although there are not that many steps left in the passage of HB 1745, we also are very limited in the amount of legislative days to accomplish all of these things. So there's only 10 legislative days left, as you'll see on the slide, a few days in September, a few more in October, and only one day in November, which is why we've been doing a lot of prep work and meeting with the senators on the Education Committee, and encouraging people to call the senators. But just from now on, we especially need to be very encouraging of the Senate Education Committee and senators about the passage of HB 1745. So here is what we're asking for help on. So the first ask right now is to call members of the Senate Education Committee and ask them to support HB 1745 and request that it's scheduled for a vote. And then once it is scheduled for a vote, that they vote in support of the bill. And right now we're putting up a slide of the members of the Education Committee. So these are the Republican members. And as you're making calls, just keep in mind that Senator Eichelberger, who is the chair, is the one who will be scheduling the vote. So if you're calling him, you can directly just ask that he schedules the vote. If you're calling any of the other members of the Senate Education Committee, you can, of course, ask for their support and ask that they encourage Senator Eichelberger to schedule the vote. So these are the Republican members and the Democratic members of the Education Committee. And we've also provided a script that you can feel free to use when you're making the calls. It's essentially just giving them your name, that you're asking that the members of the Education Committee show support for HB 1745 to vote the bill out of the Education Committee, so it can be considered by the full Senate, because young people in the foster care system should have an opportunity for higher education. And when you make these calls, feel free to provide any more detail about why you think the bill is important, or any personal experiences that show how the bill can make a positive change for young people. And to the extent that you are a young person with experience in the foster care system, or you work with young people, it's really helpful to have their stories and encourage them to call and share as well. Some other advocacy opportunities, including, in addition to calling the senators on the Education Committee, is that hopefully if the bill gets scheduled and gets moved out of committee and onto the full Senate, you can then also meet and call your senators and ask them to vote for the bill. And this can also be an opportunity to really engage young people who would be impacted by the bill in meetings and in calls. And if you want help to prepare, the Field Center and Juvenile Law Center both can help prepare you for those meetings. And we have some resources that we will share shortly that can also help. And on our slides, we also have a link that if you'll click on this slide, it will give you a link to find your senator so you know who to contact and who to call. A few other advocacy opportunities is you can sign on to our letter of support that we will be sending an updated version to Senate. Every Tuesday we tweet with the hashtag fostering higher ed. So feel free to retweet our tweets and also use the hashtag to share your own experiences with this issue to really raise the profile of why this bill is so important. And you can also work with us to write an op-ed that we have contacts to help place in papers and other venues around Pennsylvania. So all of these would be really, really helpful in the next couple of months as we try to push HB 1745 to get it passed. And one thing that we do know is that these are all of the types of advocacy opportunities that we did when the bill was in the House, and that was such a success, and that really was due to all the calls and emails and tweets that people did. So we're hoping with similar show of support, we can also have similar success in the Senate and get this bill passed. We've put together several resources for advocacy, including a lot of fact sheets that highlight information about the bill, information about why it's so important to address the various barriers that young people with foster care experience face as they're going to have higher education, and different information about what types of programs work. We also have Juvenile Law Center's testimony from the May informational meeting that will provide some additional details. And then I also have included a link to the bill itself so you can read it if you're interested, or just have that as a resource to pass along. So that is our overview of the bill. We just also want to end with some additional information about the Foster Care to College Initiative, which Debra will discuss, that highlights additional resources for young people with experience in the foster care system that we're working on in addition to HB 1745.
Thanks, Nadia. And thank you both, Nadia and Jenny, for providing such a comprehensive overview of both the legislation and what we can do to pass it. Just one other additional piece of information, even though 10 days seems rather short, if you'll notice the last date is in November and it's after the election, and the Pennsylvania legislature does not pass legislation in lame duck session, which is the time between election day and when the new members are sworn in January. So there really are only a maximum of 9 days. And there's a possibility that some of those days will be canceled. The House, for example, has already canceled 2 session days for themselves. So it's 9 maximum days. So we really have to make the best use of that. So this is something that we would encourage you to, if you're going to make any calls, do that as soon as possible. So what we want to also talk to you about is putting this piece of legislation in the context of larger work that's being done to help support the success and access for youth who've experienced foster care with higher education. And this legislation came out of work that a large number of folks have been doing from locally and across the state. So the Field Center about 5 years ago began convening stakeholders to see if we could collectively make a positive impact on access to and success in higher education for foster youth. And this work group, active work group, which meets regularly, is comprised of public agencies such as the State Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, FIA, which oversees financial aid for the state, those sorts of agencies, local nonprofits, advocacy and national expert organizations such as Juvenile Law Center and Educational Law Center, direct service providers, folks who work with youth in foster care, youth coming up through the educational system, through secondary education and preparing them for future education, foster youth themselves, and foster parents. So it's a very eclectic group who's committed to really making a difference. So, and we've taken on a number of initiatives, one of which is to help Pennsylvania follow half the country that has already passed legislation to provide some form of tuition waivers for foster youth to attend college. So we really are, this is not what we consider nationally progressive legislation, but for Pennsylvania, it's very important. And in the context of which the numbers of kids who would qualify is relatively small. It's a relatively minor financial impact. There's no money that's coming out of the state budget for this, and it would be the schools that are affected who would absorb any costs. And the costs would come after young people have already exhausted any kind of federal or state aid that they're eligible for, and they are eligible for a number of other state aid. So it really is a minimal financial impact. So when you make your calls, that's an important thing to know. So part of what we've done is we've developed collaborative partnerships. We've helped creating resources, including information on financing college for foster youth, a youth-friendly flyer that is handed out, and Juvenile Law Center houses it on their website as well. We have created a directory, a college search directory that has been created initially in southeastern Pennsylvania and is being finalized to expand statewide, that will serve as a search tool for youth in foster care to see what services that they may need and supports they may need that would be available on every degree granting nonprofit institution of secondary school and post-secondary school in the Commonwealth. We have conducted trainings. We've trained financial aid officers. We've trained young staff who work directly with youth about these issues. And so we really are working in a very comprehensive way to make a collective impact on that. And the tuition waiver is one piece of that and a very important piece. One of the things that we have done is we have helped to launch the first campus-based support programs in Pennsylvania, exclusively for foster youth. States such as California and Michigan have, for a number of years, had these programs within their state systems in particular, which provide a single point of contact for foster youth. They help build community for foster youth and help them navigate the different challenges they have. They may have services such as food pantries on campus for food insecurity. They may have emergency funds for foster youth who don't have families to turn to if they need money to buy a winter coat, they have to get home because someone's sick and can't buy a bus ticket, those sorts of things. But they also have developed a network on their campuses, so there's a point person in financial aid, a point person in the counseling office, a point person in the housing office, etc., who is the go-to person for foster youth, who will understand their situations. They won't have to tell their story over again and will understand the challenges in their unique situations. So, for example, the housing person can say, okay, I understand you have no place to go on breaks and over the summer. We can put you in a year-round dorm so that that's taken care of. So what we have done is we've help to support and provide technical assistance to the first campus-based support programs in Pennsylvania. 4 are up and running. Those are at Westchester, Temple, Community College of Philadelphia, and Cabrini University. There are 4 other ones that are in the process of being established at Penn State Abington, Manor College, Montgomery County Community College, and Chestnut Hill College. And next week, we'll be announcing the 6 additional schools that will be beginning to develop their own campus-based support programs. And those colleges will reflect the rest of the Commonwealth. So, as far west as Allegheny County and Pittsburgh, northeast part of the state. So we really have opportunities for foster youth to be able to attend programs and have supports they need on campus to help with their retention. Many of those colleges will fall under the purview of this legislation, and having these programs will meet the point of contact requirement. So they will, if this legislation is passed, they will also be able to offer tuition waivers in addition to the campus-based support programs, helping foster youth, and what we are hopeful for will improve retention rates. Retention rates have already been demonstrated to improve with these kind of programs where they've been established across the country. So with that, I will turn it back over to Nadia, and thank you very much both for your time and for your commitment to supporting more positive outcomes for foster youth.
Thank you so much, Debra, and thank you to all of our participants. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but I think we'll just take a couple minutes to see if anyone has any questions. If you do, please type them into the chat box. But otherwise, our contact information is up, so feel free to reach out if you think of something later or you would like any assistance with any of the things that we talked about today. And we are really excited about this bill, and we hope that everyone participates in getting it passed.
Nadia, can you just tell people a little bit about where will be if they want to share with me?
Sorry, you just cut out. Tell everyone what?
Where the webinar will be posted if people want to share it with their colleagues.
Sure. Rachel?
Okay, I'm sorry. So it'll be on our YouTube channel, Juvenile Law Center's YouTube channel, so people can share it. Because I know we got a couple of emails of people who couldn't join today, and we do encourage you to share it with your staff, just to give them an update and let them know of opportunities for advocacy.
Great, thanks, Jenny.
Sure.
All right, it looks like we don't have any questions, but like I said, feel free to email any of us if you have anything further. And thank you all for being on today's webinar with us.